Okay. All right. So this is my presentation on inheritable obesity due to epigenetics. So genetics is a branch of science that's more complex than most sciences. One of the most important components of genetics is inheritance, and this is because it dictates our traits, aging, and other genetic components. One interesting factor of inheritance is epigenetics, and that's the modification of gene expression regardless of genetic code. Today, it's used to study aging, mutations, and to develop drugs. This presentation is going to be on how it's used to study transgenerational diseases such as obesity. And this is crucial to study because obesity affects and takes the lives of millions every year. So we can learn about epigenetics in that it's the study of modified gene expression regardless of the genetic code, right? And it involves epigenetic markers that are typically methyl and acetyl groups that sit on top of our DNA. And when they sit on top of our DNA, they influence what the DNA does. If you ever wondered why muscle cells and brain cells work differently, even though they have the same genetic material, it's because these epigenetic markers are telling them how to act and how to work. One of the most important parts of this presentation is that these markers are introduced based on our lifestyle. This explains why two identical twins, although they have the same DNA, can be so different over time. So before we get into obesity and diseases, it's important to understand the physiology of epigenetics. Our DNA is wrapped around proteins called histones. Over here, you see a histone wrapped around with a protein, and this forms a chromatin. And we see this methyl group that's condensing the DNA around the histone. And when this happens, RNA polymerase can't transcribe DNA into RNA. But when it's acetylated with this acetyl group, the DNA is a little relaxed so that RNA can transcribe DNA into RNA. RNA polymerase can transcribe DNA into RNA. So this is a little more detailed. Over here, we see the chromatin that's acetylated, and it's a little bit relaxed. Over here, we see the chromatin that's methylated, and the RNA polymerase can't work as well, so the gene is switched off. Now, when the gene is switched off, that should remind us of the mutations we studied this semester. An example is the deletion mutation of a tumor suppressor gene. So when there's a deletion mutation on a normal tumor suppressor gene, it loses its heterozygosity and it becomes ineffective. Similarly, in regards to epigenetics, when these methyl groups sit on top of this tumor suppressor gene, they also inactivate it, causing the cell to possibly be cancerous. So this is epigenetics on how it relates with inheritance. So research shows that epigenetic markers survive cell division and they're inheritable via mother or father. Now, a lot of this research has been in animal studies, so we don't know how well that translates to humans, but there have been some human studies that show, like mothers who smoke, they may epigenetically affect their offspring. One study states that maternal smoking during pregnancy increases the risk of asthma among children who are not exposed to maternal smoking after birth. So this means that even before they're born, during the pregnancy, if a mother smokes, their child might have asthma. The study I want to discuss is of transgenerational obesity. What this really means is just that can obesity be inherited similar to how the asthma was inherited from the smoking mother? So the study I looked into was a 2016 study from Donkins and others. It profiled the epigenetic differences of spermatozoa between obese and lean men. The purpose of the study was to collect sperm from obese and lean men to find any epigenetic differences to characterize obesity in men. After, they would take another group of obese men and put them through gastric bypass surgery and see if the sperm changes at all after they lost the weight. So they did this by collecting ejaculates from 13 lean men and 10 obese men. Additionally, ejaculates were collected from 6 additional men who were scheduled for bariatric surgery, and they were collected 1 week pre-op, 1 week post-op, and 1 year post-op. So between the lean men and the obese men, we see these findings. Donkin and others found that altered non-coding RNA modulates genes involved in behavior and food intake and could lead to predisposing offspring to obesity. Also, among the 274 genes, several master regulators of appetite control and genes related to obesity and metabolism suggested that there was remodeling of epigenetic marks for genes controlling the CNS and metabolism. This also reinforced the notion that sperm in obese men are epigenetically reprogrammed for genes controlling the CNS. Okay, so the slide of results is in regards to the 6 obese men that went through the gastric bypass surgery. So 1 week after their surgery, 1,509 genes changed compared to the sample collected pre-op. After 1 year, 3910 genes changed compared to the week before the surgery. So the conclusion of this is that the sperm of obese men are epigenetically different than lean men, particularly at genes dealing with cognition and brain function. Since the sperm is affected, obviously that's going to be a contributing factor in reproduction, so the offspring may also be affected. Now, additionally, the methylation of sperm DNA, meaning when the epigenetic marks take effect on sperm DNA, that DNA is going to be changed after undergoing gastric bypass surgery. This indicates that the epigenome can reverse over time if you lose the weight. So the major takeaway points is that we know inheritance is vital to understanding life. We know that epigenetics is a major factor in understanding gene expression. Obesity is just one example of inheritable diseases caused by epigenetics. And although scientists have already studied the human genome, like we know a lot about the human genome, we still need to study the epigenome. And if we study this epigenome, we're just going to, continue to unravel all these mysteries about diseases, about aging, etc. Now that we know this information, we have to be sure on how to live our lives, because this information is really is very recent. Like this study and other studies have been conducted in just the past 10 years. So now that we know this, now that we know that our lifestyle could affect our kids, outside of environmental factors, not the way, not the way you live, what foods are available to you. It's not that at the genetic level, because your offspring are genetically predisposed based on your lifestyle, we need to remain cognizant on how we live our lives before trying to procreate. So this was just my final presentation on epigenetics.